Stay hungry, stay foolish.
If you're a shaper, you put your stamp on your work. You earn your stripes. You sync with a rhythm of life that lights you up. At times, work may be a frightening obstacle, but shapers move through adversity with temperament and tenacity. A determination to continually improve and evolve. A willingness to experiment and learn from mistakes. To create on the fly. To work fluidly. To persevere and to be patient in equal measure. To nourish the soul. A shaper is someone who becomes energized by work. The way they work provides the highest expression of self. They lead deeper and more fulfilling lives because what they do every day serves them and the greater good. We welcome the author of Shapers, Reinvent the Way You Work and Change the Future, Jonas Altman. Welcome to the show.
Aidan, what a pleasure to be here to talk about life and work and nature, and I'm excited for our conversation.
I have great news for our audience. I have a copy up for grabs. If you just sign up to the innovationshow.io newsletter, I'll give away a copy of the book there. Jonas, jump straight into this because we've so much to get through. I thought I'd tee you up to share the story of Manny and explain what a shaper is with this beautiful quote that you start the book with by Jane Goodall. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Over to you.
Wow, this is beautiful. I could talk about Manny for a long time, and the funny thing is he was so resistant for me to tell his story. He's just one of those people who's like, I'm good, like, don't worry about it. And I was persistent because I knew there was something that what you just read, that passage, putting your stamp on your work, injecting a part of your soul into what you do, and in many ways having that craftsperson type approach. Even if you're a knowledge worker or not making surfboards. So a shaper typically is a surfboard shaper who shapes surfboards for surfers. The industry has gone through a crazy transformation from the 60s where you could actually make a silhouette very much like, or a shape like a 3D printer, and then you could just batch it and make tons of them, which is what they do often in Australia and other places. Manny lives in a small town called Leucadia, which is north of San Diego, and he's a sort of a local celebrity because every surfboard he makes is specific for the person. So he's made a surfboard for the actor Jonah Hill. He's made one for me. He's making another one for me. And he always looks at what is the body type? What is the spiritual style? What is the surf style of that person? So anyway, I co-opted the name with his blessing, and I democratized it to say that anyone can be a shaper if they take some of the qualities, which is being energized by what you do, seeing work as a practice, expressing yourself creatively, and in many ways serving the greater good or doing something beyond yourself so you can lose or dissolve your ego. And Manny kind of epitomizes that.
I was reminded as well of a Bruce Lee quote that I love that only dawned on me after I'd read the book. I sent you my notes really to show you I did my homework, but I came up with this quote because it made me think of a shaper is somebody who will move with the changing environment. So the workplace is changing, the environment's changing, but their mindset needs to be fluid and flexible as well. And this quote is beautiful. You'll love this, man, if you haven't heard it. Be like water, making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle and it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Bruce Lee quote that I thought absolutely epitomized the idea of being a shaper.
Yeah, and what's beautiful about that is you used the word formless right when we started, and I wrote it down, and I just knew that quote as "be like water," like because it's too long. And, this last year and a bit, the skill du jour, the way of dancing in the unknown, of knowing that you can navigate the ambiguity and the opaqueness of work and life, has become kind of a capability that everyone needs to cultivate. And so people like you and me, who have in many ways created a lifestyle that relies on being in the liminal space and on the fringe, has maybe a head start, arguably. Maybe not, but if so, maybe I'm delusional. It's sort of like, how do I navigate the world and the world of work like water? And the mindset is, like, I think, a very powerful thing in terms of almost acting yourself into new ways of thinking.
Let's share your story as well, because you're a shaper and you discovered that your own approach to work was crushing your soul. So you got out of that. And for those people watching us on YouTube, you have a beautiful backdrop there. I mentioned to you when we connected the sequoia trees in nature, and you're feeling that now you've created a life, and as you said, and work that actually brings you to life.
Yeah, it's funny. You have a book on your podcast, and the last word in the title is burnout. It's like, dun, 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 burnout. And I did a workshop last week. I was a participant, and the woman invited me to say, well, why don't you find someone or some people who have hit the mental exhaustion, become cynics in their work or how they see themselves in their work. And the World Health Organization calls burnout an occupational phenomenon. It is not a medical condition. So we kind of get in our own way, and our to-do list never ends, and we, quote unquote, burn out. It's a sort of a modern conundrum. Before you get eaten by a bear. I just saw a bear yesterday. Like, that was your worry. Anyway, so I burnt out in London. Like, I actually hit the point where I my friends and even myself, I was aware that I was depleted. You can kind of see, like, the life force has left you, and people start to notice, like, it could be you're just tired, sort of a fractured way of working or living, where your energy is not directed in an intentional way. So, I was younger and I was living in a fast-paced city. And I think the support of some really good friends and family, and maybe hitting that point, which my coach says, getting knocked off your horse, which is different than having a pebble in your shoe. It's sort of irritating. Yeah, work, it's not so good, but I got the footy, or I got this, or I got a good friend that I work with. Like, so you're sort of getting by, or it's okay. I'm a little bit unreasonable, and I always wanted to derive or extract joy or meaning from work, which is a whole other conversation. We can get into that. So I did a little pivot there, which changed the trajectory of my career and my life, which looked like, in many ways, stopping, to use your language, stopping to be a pirate, waving the flag of being a shit disturber and a misfit inside an organization, and running a business with someone who had a totally different value system than me, and starting to look inwards of, like, what do I really enjoy doing? And that beautiful term from Japan, ikigai, maybe it has currency. Maybe the thing that I'm actually good at and that I enjoy could be in the ballpark of a way I can make a living, which is, there's a lot of literature around that's a bad idea too. But that's what I started to explore. And I went and visited Manny, and I went surfing, and I started to be like, okay, I judged him. I thought he dropped out of society and kind of became a hermit. But instead, he just simplified his life, decided what was important: his wife, his dogs, his friends, his surfboard, and being a pillar in his community. And everything just fell into place. And he moved like water. Like, he was literally like a ninja. So I kind of got influenced by him, and I think it's an aspiration. I have maybe a little bit of a resistance to call myself a shaper with the same force as a surfboard shaper. But in terms of shaping my work life, I can own that, because that's what I've been doing for 7-8 years now.
when you said there about falling off the horse, I think often about that many people experience that, what you experienced, and they feel judged by it. They feel shame and fear and everything. And I often think, man, that if you think of life and your life force as a divining rod, you know those divining rods where you look for water. And I think sometimes those experiences are the universe saying to you, this isn't for you. You know, it's like, give me a sign, any sign, and it starts raining thunder and lightning and everything. I'm like, on any sign. and the universe is going, I told you 50 times already, because I keep putting obstacles in your way and you need to read them. And I go back to the water thing and Bruce Lee, the water doesn't stop at a rock, it goes around it, or it over time it erodes it. But the energy expended in eroding the rock could be much better utilized somewhere else. And I think sometimes the universe is telling people, you need to look elsewhere. And knowing what you don't want is valuable, because knowing what you don't want is almost failing your way to success.
Well said. Yeah. I mean, that's what people ask me now, because I teach a course at the university, and a student who she aced her presentation. Like, I was looking at what advice to give her, because she was asking, I'm really enjoying marketing and storytelling, but I'm on this business sort of MBA route to go work at, say, whatever, one of the big 4 or big 5 firms. And I haven't replied to her yet. And I'm kind of like reluctant to. But one thing that comes up is you got to try on a lot of different things. So sort of fail your way to success, or find out what you don't want to do. And so she's doing that already. So I'm like, keep doing that. Like, if marketing and storytelling seems more aligned with you, and this sort of commerce route, being accountant doesn't, this is a great time to experiment, given that you have that sort of luxury or safety net for the next few years. So it's an interesting sort of strategy to prototype and hack your way to your sort of career versus having this linear kind of trajectory.
You mentioned students there. I lecture as well, and I find the students sometimes they're not even living their own life. They're living a life that they think other people expect of them, whether it be parents or friends. And then, like Manny's and Jonas's of the world and Aidan's of the world, who go, actually, no, I'm not doing this. There's a stigma that's starting to fade with that, where there's often a judgment of kind of going, oh, I don't know what that guy is doing, and once you don't care about that, it's so liberating when you actually don't care what people think anymore. But I want to get to meaning, Jonas, because you start right up there with meaning, and you say, as shapers, we pursue our vision for fulfilling work because it impacts every aspect of our lives and the lives of those around us. And shapers know that happiness is perpetually in flux while meaning persists over time. I think this is really important, that aiming for happiness is a fool's errand in some way, because happiness is in flux all the time, but having meaning as that kind of gravitational force to pull you towards something is a whole different ball game. I'd love if you'd share some thoughts on that. Yeah,
such a beautiful question. I'm looking at nature right now, and a good example would be this. It's from sociology, and it's a term that plants can bind light. It's their source of energy. And humans can bind time. We can reflect into the past, and we can project into the future, and I can be here with you now. So if we had to do a mapping or a analysis of happiness or over meaning, or in comparison to meaning, you could say that meaning transcends time. You reflect back on a holiday or on an experience, and you have nostalgia or melancholy, and you anticipate summer, or going to Spain and having a sangria. And that's a unique human quality. At least that's what scientists, maybe dolphins project, like, oh, I'm going to go and hang out over there. But generally, that's a beautiful thing. And when we think about how we project meaning onto something, a lot of it, back to our mindset and psychology, is Oh, how's work going? Oh, I'm working on a really great project. It's making a big difference. Oh, that sounds like you're fulfilled, or you start to use those words. Whereas when you're seeking happiness, I use the example of ice cream because I love ice cream. It's fleeting, it's ephemeral, it's something you feel like you can possess as opposed to a sustained state or way of being and moving through the world. And so, there's a lot of literature around, I guess logotherapy from Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Often we're looking to get it from things like enlightenment, wisdom, love, creative works, but a lot of it has to do with our inner world and our inner state. So going and searching for it externally, back to your quote, that comment before about caring what other people think, it reminded me of Quincy Jones's quote of not 1 ounce of my self-worth is dependent on your acceptance of me. He'll do whatever he needs to make a good track or to express himself. And even his daughters, Rashida Jones, is probably an ultimate shaper where she's like a comedian and an actress and an activist. She just doesn't care. She's formless. So you're seeing people out there that are Michelle Obama. It's like, I need to get people to start eating healthy. If people started eating healthy, we wouldn't be in such a terrible state that we're in America and in the world. So it's I'm very passionate about it, and I spend a lot of time trying to figure out for other people what might be their path. And I always come back to another beautiful quote of there is the path you're on is perfect. Just don't hesitate as you go. Like if you're on that path, go, like do it. You're eating raisins, eat raisins. You're having a podcast, do it. And that's hard for a lot of people because of, and including myself, of the inner voices, resistance, saboteurs, get in the way. You get in your own way and you're like, well, maybe I should get more training before I apply for the job. Maybe I need a little bit more money before I quit. And meaning becomes this thing we've gotten enamored with. And here's the big sort of, philosophical or conundrum is, why is work a place that we're looking to extract or find meaning from in the first place? It used to be the church, the mosque, or the synagogue. So I try to talk a little bit about that, but that's a long sort of meandering way of saying we are there. Work is a place that many people want to feel sense of fulfillment, joy, and energy.
Feel free to meander, man. I go down rabbit holes the whole time. We'll meander like that river going around rocks as we go throughout today's show, right? So let's agree to that. But you mentioned work there because you dedicate early chapters to the history of work in a way. But I really wanted to share an extract that I loved. You said the word for work in Greek is ponos. It originates from the Latin poena, meaning sorrow. The ancient Greeks, as well as the Hebrews and medieval Christians, viewed work as a curse. At its base, work was pain and drudgery. As a religious responsibility, work allowed little room for self-expression. And I that spoke to me for many reasons, because our definition of work has changed. And I think this is why the idea of being a shaper and being formless and using meaning as that gravitational force or the divining rod to find what you're meant to be doing on the planet is really important. But unfortunately, for the majority of the world, work is still ponos. It's still drudgery and slavery.
Yes. And, those shackles seem to be coming off. I mean, one caveat is to talk about low-paying or low-skilled work, which is routine and repetitive, which is in many ways factory work, and the migration from the factory to the office, or from the machine on the assembly line to the keyboard, if that's something that we can entertain is happening or has happened. The conundrum is all the questions of like, am I going to be a UX designer, a social media marketer, an influencer, a YouTuber, a data scientist? It's like so many things you could do from your computer with Wi-Fi, and COVID cracked that wide open. And a lot of existential angst or residue is there that people didn't have time to navel gaze because they were too busy going to and from work or dropping the kids off. And all of a sudden, it's like I'm stuck in this loop in a Groundhog Day for more introspection and contemplation. So we're back to, okay, that's great. We get to explore and investigate what would it look like to shift or shape my career in a meaningful way or in a purposeful way, which is great to start entertaining that. Yet it never really works like you just change your ticket. It's not like you're in a casino and you can just be like, I'm going to go play this slot machine. You almost have to like try on different working identities, lose your rugby identity as the sportsman and move into the innovation guru. It doesn't happen like, it's like a mixtape, right? It's usually there's a fade and there's a minute where you're like, what song is this? It's both. And then the next thing you know, you're onto the bumpin' BB house track. So I look at it as like, what is the working identity and the space in between careers or jobs, not being awkward or uncomfortable, but actually a necessary path like Bruce Lee's water that you're going to do probably 3, 4, or 5 times in your life if you're born like after 1980. It's just become a fact. And so this becomes learning how to learn, learning how to grow, doing the work on yourself, doing the work on others, which is basically self-awareness of being aware of your relation to others, which is from Esther Perel, your connection to nature and resetting. This is all part of work. So when people say I'm doing the work, it's like, but are you getting paid for it? And you're like, no, I'm doing the things that actually are going to help me to do what I need to do, back to your vessel and vehicle, to be the conduit, I think of lightning, that can translate, which is a word that a lot of people use, between what is now the reality and what could be the reality, what is now the status quo, and what could be if we entertain or test out alternative futures.
The thing I love there, man, is the middle part, like the mixtape analogy. I love it.
Yeah.
That it's always messy in the middle between one jump from where you are to the next jump, from one career to the next, from one persona to the next. I love the word persona. It comes from the Greek and it refers to the masks that actors used to wear in the ancient plays where they'd play several people at once. And the persona is the mask. And yes. Carl Jung then adopted it to psychology as these masks we wear in society. Now, we have to wear masks like that sometimes in order to not come across too crazily. And by the way, I always wear a pin that tries to reflect each show. And the pin, I don't know if you can see it, is a lady peeling off her mask. And I was like, yes, that's the one I'm going to use for Jonas.
I like that.
Yeah.
I can't see the detail. I thought it was like an Irish sort of ceremonial thing.
There we are.
Oh, okay.
Spaceship Earth, man.
Yeah, very cool.
So I want to move on to this because what you talk about is in the book is shapers as individuals, but then also that the workplace needs to shape and become formless. And we had the brilliant Bob Johansson on the show before from the Institute of the Future, and his book Full Spectrum Thinking. He talked about this concept called the shape-shifting organization, that the organization needs to shift and shape-shift to fit the new environment. And you talk about, and we've many human resources and learning and development listeners of the show, and they deal with an archaic system in some ways. And you talk about inhumane resources and say, yes, when traditional labor-orientated jobs gave way to knowledge-based ones, most corporations did not upgrade their recruitment incentives. Some started to individualize rewards, giving each employee an opportunity to tailor a benefits package, but few reorientated towards the seismic shift in the marketplace. I think that's a really important point, that if we're upgrading ourselves, the system, the environment needs to upgrade with us.
Yeah. I mean, so there's a couple of things to say there. One is HR itself has gone through reinvention, and it's typically now called, in sexy companies, people and culture. Onboarding, offboarding, events, experience, learning and development, in effect, a marketing function. It's always been a marketing function. Is come work for Google, come work for Apple, come work for our startup. And the idea of a formless or amorphous organization is one that can cater to the individuality of the person, but also to the shared power of the collective, which is a tension between autonomy and alignment, between networks and hierarchy, between openness and secrecy. And so some of the smartest and most powerful organizations have either moved to some form of self-management, which is giving more dignity and, say, freedom to the worker, but also treating people as assets and talent, as opposed to resources to be managed and exploited like coal. There's an idea of presenting yourself in everyday life. So I didn't know we were recording, but I put on this, which is a shirt that was at the surf shop. And I was like, oh, plaid, like that was out of style and it's in style. But I didn't know we were recording. And then when you said we're going to be recording video, I all of a sudden moved into a different form of like, oh, how do I look? Like, am I presentable as an author or as a thinker or as a human? And so when I think about losing our masks, it's not that we like are just raw and you don't conform. It's that you don't lose your essence. Aidan walks into the corporate strategy meeting and you command the power that is the consultant that they're paying you for external expertise. And you play that, but you play that like the instrument, you're in your own way. And so I think there's a sort of a dance that is done between asserting yourself and who you are and sinking to the tribe.
Yeah, the tribe's an interesting one. I had a brilliant guest on the show before, and he talked about this amazing, because I know nature's really important to you. Dexter Diaz, great name, right? And his book...
Yeah, his book rolls off the tongue.
Oh, it's a great name. And his book is called The 10 Types of Human, and he was basically describing how we can do horrific things and what leads to those things. But there was a beautiful idea he talked about, a lady called, I'm thinking, Dr. Marion Wong, I think her name was. And she studied goby fish, right, in Australia, off the coast of Australia. And what she found was that gobies maintained a hierarchy of size, right? So they were exactly the same size, smaller than the higher goby in the hierarchy. And the reason they did, and they self-regulated, man, because say, for example, I started to put on weight as a goby fish, I'd self-regulate and starve myself a little bit to get my weight down. And the reason was they paid a price to be part of the tribe. And if you stepped above your station, you would be ejected from the tribe and you'd be eaten by another bigger fish. And I thought about that and I went, that is the price we pay for working in organizations. But for many of our listeners who work in organizations like that, they are shapers or they're pirates in the Navy. But there's a price you pay for the safety and the regular income, etc. And there's nothing wrong with that. I really want to make sure that's clear. There's nothing wrong with that. But you will always be looking for greener pastures elsewhere. It's difficult because many people have mortgages. They have, kids to pay for college, particularly in places like the States where the fees are horrific. So there's nothing wrong with that. But as you say, you can be a shaper and you can maintain your essence. You can maintain ethics, etc. And this is why I think meaning in an organization like that, if you can find that meaning or find it elsewhere and bring it into work some way, it's really important. So you can be like that mixtape you talked about where you're playing a bit of jazz and a bit of reggae at once, but not over each other. You kind of sometimes, go between both and do a little mixtape with your mixer and you're scratching over them. But you need to maintain your essence, because if you don't, I actually believe that it leads to sickness and ill health. And ultimately, you're out of sync with who you really are.
Yeah. And I want to riff on that. If anyone's listening that's looking for the business case, there's no need for looking any further that diversity is good business. That's like known. there's no need to look any further that curiosity is a superpower, and asking generous and powerful questions versus being a Mr. Know-It or Mrs. Know-It-All. But when you look at engagement, the biggest indicator of engagement is the sense of making meaningful progress in your work. If you feel you're making meaningful progress in your work, your mental health increases, your collaboration quotient increases, your creativity increases, your productivity increases, and the bottom line of the company goes up. So it's not just like, oh, it would be nice for people to feel connected to their work. It's a necessity.
I'm thinking here about how the organization needs to shape-shift itself. So it needs to be a shaper organization. And I love this. You mentioned pirates in the Navy. Companies want misfits. They want these agitators. They want the change makers. They want the entrepreneurs. Yet they want to hire them in the old-fashioned way. And the way they want revolutionaries, yet they want their most conservative leaders to identify them. And a conservative leader, the head of the Navy, for example, an admiral in the Navy, isn't going to welcome a pirate because they're going to see them as a threat to the order or the status quo.
I mean, it's pretty much what you just said about the fish, which is beautiful. You could look at it as like almost a cost-benefit analysis of like eat or be eaten or disrupt or be disrupted. So what do we stand to lose by not hiring or at least collaborating with shit disturbers, pirates and mavericks? And if you look at Netflix's net prize challenge for their algorithm as an example, the smartest people in the world aren't working at our company. How do we harness their intelligence? Procter & Gamble. There's tons of companies that do open innovation. Well, IDEO. So they kind of got the ticket that the misfits and the pirates don't have to be full-time employees. Arguably. If they are, it's a certain type of person that, and you've talked about this in your podcast, that can rub up and instill change within as a participatory event as opposed to a lone wolf. I did not thrive as an entrepreneur at the university because I only had a certain resistance that I could get to, and then I was like, I'm out. I think it was like 2 to 3 years, and I was like, I've done as much as I can do with the skills and inner resources that I have, and I can honestly say that I would then be ineffective. Whereas other people might have a shorter bandwidth or much longer. I mean, the change happens for people like 5-10 years in an organization. So I really believe that the entrepreneur is often not as celebrated as the entrepreneur, obviously, for a lot of reasons, but also that, having someone who is risk adverse, identify people who are risk friendly, and then giving them a high five and a fist pump is crazy. That's not happening.
Come on and cannibalize us. Come on.
Yeah, come on,
just chop my head off. It's like that bug that eats after sex, eats the other bugs. Well, I had fun,
Brilliant. I was thinking about that because there's a few regular listeners to the show, and I'm not going to name them, but they've recently left big corporate organizations they worked in. And I know by interactions with them that they felt in a way they'd failed. And I think it's really important. And I was the show you mentioned about burnout was a great show about catalysts. A lady called Shannon Lucas. Great episode. And we talked about this because I had this myself, in that, because you nailed it, you can only do so much and give so much of yourself. And let's go back to the water analogy, which we didn't plan, by the way. We're totally Miles Davidson this with our jazz freestyle. But the whole idea is you can only meander as water around so many rocks, and then you may come to a dam, and you can't get through that. And if you keep persisting, it's going to just take your life force away. And I think that's a really important point, and that those people that experience that don't see it as a judgment of themselves. They did their very best. They brought it as far as they possibly could, and be happy to have the experience, learn from it. The road, you mentioned about falling off the horse, those road to Damascus moments where you actually go brush yourself off and go, okay, what can I bring from this and what assets are in the ashes of that experience that I can bring onto my next mixtape song that I'm going to bring in. Maybe it's drum and bass this time.
You know, it's beautiful because in some ways that's the definition of confidence and quiet confidence and self-leadership. The ability to fall off your horse, fail, pick yourself back up, and keep going is, you know, you can call it resilience, you can call it grit. It's a certain type of person that doesn't sit around and become a victim and start blaming. And when you talked about this idea of the river again and then getting to the dam, it kind of reminds me of like the strategies that people can employ when they're in an organization and they have the safety net or the veil of security. Do you job craft and try to turn the job you have into one you love? That's possible. You can do that through shaping your tasks, shaping your relationships, or sort of updating your mindset. Maybe it's time to hit eject and off to the next episode, the next track. And also Peter Drucker talks about parallel careers. So maybe it's actually you still work in the organization or with the organization, but in a new incarnation, a consultant, part-time, job sharing, or you move from HR to marketing or from legal to A&R, you know, and so it's become a little bit more opaque and uncertain of like, what does the relationship look like between workers and their organization? And statistics are showing that close to half the economy are filing more than one employer on their tax form, which means they're freelancers or, you know, freelancers. They sell their time to more than one organization at the same time.
It's an important point you make here because you distinguish between a shaper and a hustler because there's a lot of, you know, work yourself to the bone here 24/7, you know, type of mentality out there. And that's entirely wrong because working around the clock and wearing an always on badge with pride is the mark of a hustler. There is no time to turn off when you're so turned on as the hustler claims. The saner strategy, as you say, of the shaper is to intentionally funnel the working spirit, toiling in bursts, followed by rest and reflection. That really spoke to me because a couple of weeks ago we had the brilliant Barbara Oakley on the show, and her book was called Learn Like a Pro, and she has one of the most ever downloaded courses on Coursera, and it's free, by the way. It's called Learn How to Learn. And she talked about this, and behind me, you'll see I have a Pomodoro timer. I use this for my deep work because I do bursts of 25 on, 5 minutes off. And Barbara told us the science behind that because your brain, during those periods of break, of the 5-minute breaks, parts of your brain speak to each other. So say, for example, I was learning something, I was reading something. When I take that 5 minutes off and I don't go and check my WhatsApp or my LinkedIn or my Facebook, whatever floats your boat, when I don't do that, instead I walk to the bathroom or I do a press up or I have a cup of tea, during that moment, your brain actually goes, hey, the stuff that you were learning there, this is what it's about. And your brain's actually communicating within itself. And I thought about that as an analogy or a metaphor for that's actually what you're talking about from a workplace environment, that it's not just about the learning aspect of that. It's about the energy management of that is so important.
We don't think of institutions as having tacit knowledge or, institutionalized behavior and ways of operating, sharing information and letting things simmer. So at the individual level, it's probably worth saying, yes, people are like, I do time batching, I do deep work, I work in bursts, and it's kind of, maybe it's sexy for some people to like say it, and then it's another thing to make it like a practice, like brushing your teeth. So I couldn't have written the book without doing it. It was 6 days a week, 9:30 to 11:30 every day, writing without fail. It was almost like instead of Seinfeld who writes a joke or keeps writing jokes and then rips them up, and it's kind of like you just keep doing it, or streakers that run every day, you don't do it daily-ish. it becomes a deliberate practice. So whatever is right for someone, it could be Pomodoro technique, it could be binary, where they work for 2 days or 3 days in about a 3 or 4 hour session, then they take a full day off and go for walks or something. But I think that's a very valid point for now, which is my deep work and my rhythms don't work anymore because of COVID or my age or my environment. So I need to hack it and experiment to say, well, if I can't get what I used to get in because my muscles, my cognitive muscles are depleted because we're all grieving and we're all going through a mass shift in our psychology, then what is generous for myself? Morning walks. Start off with an hour morning walk and then open my computer, whatever it might be. So I did that on Monday. And then to your point about the institution, I wonder if there's an invitation or an opportunity to use technology, because you talked about this in the Pirate Show, that people have conflated technology and innovation. Technology ideally should nudge or reinforce human behavior. It doesn't necessarily need to mean like everyone's moving to Slack. Slack, which is a Vancouver-based company which moved to San Francisco, in many ways is the bane of many people's existence. So those notifications that were coming on weren't Slack, but the same thing. I can't be on a podcast with notifications going on. Same way, I need to get work done. I don't need to over-engineer and be present on 15 different channels to show the mask of a professional worker who's working in their kitchen with their kid homeschooling and their cat eating from the cat litter. And so that's what happened is people got to like, what utility does this have? Is it assaulting or taking away from my creative work or knowledge work? And you're already, ahead of the game because you have to, because you work for yourself. Your currency is to be able to translate and take these books and this theory and this knowledge and life experience and package it so that it lands and helps mindsets and behavior change. Alternatively, you could just stay in an organization and be in a sort of a cesspool, back to our water, of just regurgitating the same things, which is take it forward, quarterly reports. What does that look like? Let's parking lot that. And it's all the jargon that we hear that doesn't mean anything.
You mentioned this when we first connected, the idea of theory X and theory Y. And
yes.
This is an important one, I thought, that the management styles. And this was the work of social psychologist Douglas McGregor. I'd love if you'd share these two distinct types.
I would be more enamored with Y because it's more open, participatory, empathetic. It's sort of the Brene Brown modern day female energy. And X would be more mandated, command and control, hierarchical, kind of the way, corporate America, Fortune 500 companies say were. And Jeff Bezos in many ways embodies both, if you think about it. So Amazon Fire, which was their phone, billions of dollars that he or the company invested in to make the phone, total failure. The gem of that is it became speech recognition for Alexa. And that in some ways is why leadership, of giving money, resources, and a runway to fail and then innovate. Yet, if you watch sort of his sort of behavior with warehouses and micromanaging and controlling and everyone becoming, back to your beautiful fish analogy, the same, an Amazonian, it's very much X. So it's not like you're an X or Y leader. Ricardo Semler from Semco would be a Y. He fired all the leaders and he let everyone set their own salaries and set their own agendas. And it worked really well. I'm sure if you think about it, or if you speak to him, not that I have, there's elements of him that showed X-style leadership. Same with the Tony Zay, rest in peace. And when he set up Holacracy at Zappos, he was still the boss. He still was like, this is what we're doing. But in many ways, he was trying to give autonomy and treat adults like adults. So I believe that theory Y, more participatory, more sharing of power, more collective intelligence, making faster and better decisions is the way of the future. But X, which is more hierarchical and command and control, is still necessary. And there's a brilliant book, which I haven't read, $1 Trillion Coach, which has a slide or a page of like all leaders need to be excellent managers, and then people will also follow them and they'll be leaders. You can't be necessarily a great leader without also having been a good manager. And it kind of was like a moment for me, because I'm not a great manager. I'm too mavericky. So I'm like, you know what to do and go. And it's like, no, I'm looking for direction. Maybe they're a recent graduate. And so there's a beautiful dance, I think, between theory Y and theory X that we're seeing in the workplace.
So I wanted to share, because I didn't know this and I think it's brilliant. You mentioned Zappos there, Antonio Zaid, may rest in peace. You mentioned when they hire somebody and the person realizes, oh, this isn't for me, they actually pay them to leave. I thought that was brilliant.
It's sort of like, there's this thing of hire slow and fire fast. It's like, back to relational energy. I have a friend in Australia, and he's having a tough time with a colleague or with someone he's hired, and it's almost like the energy and life force of him is being sucked in trying to make this person conform to the school of fish. And so either he needs to fire her and say, I'm going to give you the dignity to go and work in a place where you'll flourish, or invite her to self-regulate, to use your term. And so I think with Zappos, it's like self-management or holacracy, and they're not the exact same thing, isn't for anyone. That's why about 30% of the people said, I'm good, I'm going to leave. But if you want to bring your whole self to work and you're willing to be emotional and vulnerable and aren't kind of concerned with your job title as opposed to outcomes, it might be a place that you'll thrive amongst all the other things. Like, do you want to sell shoes online? That's another whole story. So I believe that's a beautiful thing. And the other little cool thing was that the person that would pick up the interviewee at the airport in Las Vegas would be also part of the interview process, to be like, is this person a kind soul? Is this person the kind of person that if they answered the phone for a customer, they would represent our best intentions, or are they a brilliant jerk?
Jonas, we could play jazz all day, podcast jazz, but we won't have time. So you offer a Shaper manifesto at the end of the book, right? And I was going to quote from that, and I thought, that's too easy, Aidan. That's too easy. Find a nugget in there that I wanted to share, and I really love this one. Before I leave it, because it's my parting message, something that I love from the book, where can people find out more about your workshops? Where can people find out about you, your book, etc.?
Thanks for that. They can go to shapers.life on the old internet, and there they will find some free chapters of the book, wherever they could order the book, local bookstore or the big bookstore. And from there, there's also a program that we're offering, which is starting next week again, and then hopefully at some point will be in real life, which is an 8-week program that takes people through a journey much deeper with a great gang of facilitators and coaches. And that's shapers.life/program.
Beautiful. I'm going to read this quote here, and then I'd love you to finish today's show with a quote of your own, something that you want to, some message, you as the instrument that wants to impart to our audience. So here I go. Giving life to an unexpressed self takes courage, but the possibility and the reward that awaits has never been riper. There's no time to waste. We can slay those stories that trap ourselves today. The promise of a bigger paycheck or promotion means little if deep down we know we're in shoes we don't wish to fill. While some cling to old ways of working, shapers see the Titanic sinking. We won't, heck no, we can't, suppress who we are for the sake of fitting in. Those who fail to speak up or do something about what's really going on in their soul-destroying workplaces suffer devastating side effects, resentment, infighting, poor mental health, physical ailments. The list goes on and on. Worse still, the emotionally toxic residue lingers, bringing it home at night and then lugging it back the next morning in a wicked loop. If this resonates in some way, then ask yourself, what do you have control over? Over to you, Jonas, to close today's show.
Wow. Thanks for that. This is almost into Buddhism territory of what do we have control over? And to your term, regulate. We can regulate our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. We can acknowledge whether something feels off. If it smells like a fish, maybe it is a fish. Back to her. So I think I would say one or two things. We're in a time, and we can look into history where there's either a rebuilding. There's been things that have been revealed, and people are reconfiguring both their identity, their working identity, and potentially being more discerning with what matters most. And all of this is in many ways a luxury to be able to entertain joy and meaning and fulfillment at work. Back to our, drudgery and a one-way ticket to salvation, which was what work used to be. So I think the sort of nugget was, if you have the position to even entertain some of these ideas and some of the things that you just read, there's a sort of an internal duty to give life to it, to give light to it. And so as provocateurs, you and myself included, it doesn't happen in isolation. It happens as a team sport. So lean into your friends, lean into people you don't know, and adopt a growth mindset of, what does this person have, or does this community have, that I could benefit from, and what do I have to share? And this is a really great time to not just entertain new pathways, but to test them out. And so I would welcome anyone to follow the path that is right. Just don't hesitate as they go, to quote my friend Naveed Akram.
Beautiful. Author of Shapers, Reinvent the Way You Work and Change the Future. Jonas Altman, remain like water, my friend.
Thank you. Aidan, it's been a pleasure.